for me, one of the biggest things wrapped up with masking is a tendency to people please, to where I will not express my wants and needs because I want the other person to be happy. And that very much comes out of the need to mask and the need to protect myself. So I didn't think I was masking at all. Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenomy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, and this is a podcast, not medical advice. Have you always felt a little bit different but didn't know why? Have you struggled with tasks that some people seem to handle with ease? Are you mystified by social norms and interactions? Divergent Paths is a podcast for late diagnosed neurodivergent people to discuss their journeys discovering the joys and frustrations of having a spicy brain. Our Everything You Need to Know About series will take a deep dive into some of the common characteristics neurospicy individuals experience. Joining me for this series is my longtime friend and host of the Business DIY podcast, Russ Catanach. Masking is a common phenomenon for people with spicy brains. Almost every person we've interviewed mentions something about the stress they experience masking and hiding their authentic selves. In this episode, we will discuss what masking means and the complicated but rewarding process of unmasking. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths.
The interesting thing, and what I see in a lot of the episodes and talking with you, is that the behaviors that we're discussing I feel like are prevalent in just a lot of people. Like
right?
A lot of people, like especially masking, I feel. A lot of people.
Like a lot of people mask even if they're not neurodivergent?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like it's a thing that people do. Now, maybe it's when they're neurodivergent, it's more, it's more to the extreme. But
Sure.
I feel like everybody does because, when they go to work, are they truly themselves? When they're sitting down to dinner, are they truly themselves? Even, at dinner with their parents or something, right? Or dinner with, somebody coming over for dinner that you don't really know
So you have
that
like
well or whatever.
different levels of comfort, maybe, right? Or a different persona, even maybe that you take on, like, a work persona or a family persona. I mean, like,
Right.
yeah, that's not exactly, I think, what masking is.
Okay. So then tell me, Regina, what is masking?
So masking is a conscious or unconscious urge to suppress certain parts of who you are because they make people uncomfortable.
Okay.
So because it's trying to fit into, like, we have neurotypical standards, right? Like that's kind of like how we have perceived the world to work, by standards of people who have brains that create a regular amount of dopamine, who like regular activity is one of the big things in terms of like dopamine is for people who are neurotypical. They will get a charge from completing something. No matter how mundane it is, like it could just be taking out the garbage and they could feel a sense of satisfaction doing that. A lot of neurodiverse people don't get that. Like I don't get a charge necessarily checking mundane things off my to-do list, because my nervous system is interest-based. So I want to be excited about what I'm doing. I don't care what it is that I'm doing sometimes. I just want to be excited about doing it. And not just the lack of dopamine production, but for some people, the excitement that I have over my special interests can be off-putting sometimes, because I want to talk very much at depth about things that people aren't interested in. I will hyper-focus and I will verbally stim. I used to do this with my ex-husband. I would tell the same story 3 different ways because I was processing through it in my at,
Mm.
externally. So I needed the external, like I needed to talk through it a couple of times. And he's like, if you tell the story again, I'm going to like get up and walk out of the room. Like, I don't want to be around you
Are,
when you're like
are you
this.
telling the story 3 times in a row, or is it 3 different instances?
No,
Or
like 3 times in a row, I would be still like, if I was stuck on something, like if something in this particular instance that I'm thinking of, I had had a bad day, I had a bad teaching day, I had had a bad class, things hadn't gone well, and I was trying to process through what had happened in the course or what happened in class that day so that I could reframe or adjust or whatnot. And so, like, sometimes I play the scenario through a few different times, like, and I'm talking about it, and if the person receiving that isn't in a place to be open to you communicating that way, they can shut you
Mhm.
down. And I learned very quickly that those were behaviors that, you know, that is definitely part of what I mask a lot. I still struggle sometimes with being okay, just like I just need to talk sometimes.
So so what happens when you get shut down? What do you go through? So, obviously, if you're telling the same story to somebody, or
Mhm.
like in your example of the husband kind of wanting to just
Yeah.
walk out of the room for that.
Yeah, exactly.
When
Just being, yeah.
when somebody's telling you, like, kind of cutting you off with the, "Oh, right, you told me that. Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, yes, you said that." Or things in that general area, like, how does that make you feel?
Oh, I get embarrassed. I
Embarrassed.
feel I feel shame sometimes. Like,
Uh, that is not the so you could
it's not
see,
where you
like,
thought it was going, right?
no,
Yeah.
no, I thought,
I
there
used to.
would
I don't
be
now. I feel less now because now I'm more comfortable being unmasked now. But though
interesting.
I would have felt embarrassed or shame, I would have felt shameful about it for sure.
Wow, I was thinking you would go with, frustration, anger, like, "Oh, I don't get to do my story. I don't get to say this. I don't get to work this out verbally. So
Right?
I'm angry about that." But you're feeling embarrassed and shame for it. That's
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because I
was
think
not
a lot.
expected.
Yeah, it was on. Well, good. Then that's already like opening your experience or your understanding
Totally.
of this up.
Yeah.
And I think I am slow to anger just personally in general. I mean, it might make other people feel angry. Now I understand. I might be more inclined now or might have more of an emotional reaction now to feel angry if my reaction now would be more emotionally mature, where I would ask and say, if someone got upset with me or if he's like, I don't want to hear this, I'm going to walk out of the room, I would have been like, why didn't you tell me you didn't have the space for me to process this right now? Right. But this is
Mhm.
coming from a Regina who is significantly more healed than I
Right.
was in my 20s when I had absolutely no idea that I was neurodivergent or what was going on, and was still trying and still worried about losing relationships. And if anything I have picked up on and anything that I have come to be comfortable with in my journey of unmasking, it's that I'm going to lose people in my life because of it.
Hmm.
And I don't feel shame anymore about that. Like, it's just this is the process. Like, unfortunately,
Right.
I'm different.
Have you ever read the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck?
I have not.
Yeah. Read that book.
Okay.
It's great. I mean, it makes it where it is okay to lose
Right.
people, to say things, because you don't the people that, you know,
The people who want to be in
are
your
not gonna
life are going to
contribute
understand. The
properly
people,
to your life don't need
yeah.
to be there. Yeah,
Exactly. The people who
yeah.
wanna be in my life will understand that I'm going through this process, why I'm going through this process. It's part of why we're
Mhm,
talking about it. Like, we've had so many people that we've been in the interviews that we have been talking about masking. This has been definitely one of the most prevalent recurrent themes that we've seen, right? In
mhm.
the
Yeah.
episodes that you've been editing the interviews and we've been listening. And it is definitely a prevalent, it is a survival tactic. It is what you do when you don't know what else to do. You mimic what you're supposed to be doing. The metaphor, I think, that was in a TikTok video. I think Rachel brought it up, and I think I brought it up somewhere else too, where you're a zebra in a herd of horses, right?
Mhm.
So you look different and you probably smell a little different. You don't behave the same way and you're really not the same species, but you gotta put a coat on and make yourself look like a horse, you know?
Right. Right. So, okay. So when did you first recognize that you were masking?
When I first learned about masking, I didn't think I masked at all.
Okay.
I didn't believe it for 1 second. This is who I am.
Right.
I've never been doing this, and then I started to slowly understand, "Oh, I'm not doing this because I wanna do this. I'm not looking this way because I'm not looking not like my physical appearance necessarily, but, I'm I am communicating this, I am talking in a way, I am, accommodating the other people, like, that for me, the one of the biggest things wrapped up with masking is a tendency to people please, to where I will not express my wants and needs because I want the other person to be happy. And that very much comes out of the need to mask and the need to protect myself.
Hmm.
So I didn't think I was masking at all.
Right. Right. So when you discovered it, was it a, you know, like a Batman moment? I'm taking off the mask and all of a sudden I'm Bruce Wayne, or was it a slow, gradual
It was definitely
removal?
a slow and gradual process for me. It was like stripping away layers that I had, um, kind of plastered on myself, almost a mummification,
Right.
where I had wrapped like this like secure little, young Regina who was taught that her behaviors were not necessarily appropriate. Um, I had layers upon layers of masking, and so for me, it was really a stripping away of the layers of performance. And what was interesting, one of the biggest things that has come out of this is I would have always said that I was more introverted than extroverted. Like everybody is both introverted and extroverted, right? But I would have always said that I was more introverted. Unmasking has made me realize I am more extroverted, which is a really kind of the opposite process, I think, that happens for a lot of people. But I think because I was masking, and masking is a very draining process, I felt like I needed more time to recharge. Now that I go into social situations and I'm practicing the subtle art of not giving a fuck, even if I don't know the book's, description of it. I come out of, social interactions. I spent a lot of time this week interacting with people and feeling very charged by it, not drained. Like I came home tired, but tired in that like I got really good sleep last night. I got really good sleep last
Hmm.
night because I had a lot of really positive social interactions with as an unmasked person.
It's kind of like I guess it's harder because you're sort of playing a character.
Mhm.
You're
Yep.
playing this role
Yep.
and you've got to put all of this energy into being that
Yep.
role. If you were just being yourself, all of a sudden you don't have to put that energy into it. And
Right.
you're just
It's
who you
it's like,
are.
I've seen a couple of, memes that are like, my benormal.exe program is running in the background all the time. It's taking up like
Right.
a low level section of my executive functioning was always spent trying to look normal and trying to act in a way that was appropriate based on the situation. And because of that, I became very good at 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 picking up on who somebody else was and in a lot of ways presenting them back to themselves. That's like the
Mm.
the fastest way to adapt for me was I became a little bit of who that person was.
Mirroring.
Mhm.
Um, these are things they teach you when you're learning how to do sales, right? Like
Right. Right.
mirror the person kind
Yeah,
of,
how they stand and like, things like that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Which even in doing that, like, I mean, I when I was, when I would go out and do like these sales meetings for the company that I owned, there were oftentimes I would give you a ring afterwards and I'd be like, man, that was just so draining.
Yes. Yep.
I was just like done. And what was interesting about it is it's draining in the presentation when you're not being yourself. And the thing is, it's like that was like my younger sales days. Now I feel like that I've done that. It's less about masking and mirroring and doing all of those things, and it's just about being myself and talking to somebody and getting to know them. It's like it took me a while to realize that, I think, but I I would get on the phone afterwards to talk to somebody so that I could just be myself,
Right.
and it would make me feel kind of rejuvenated.
Yeah.
In those social situations, though, I'll ask you this: if you're in the people pleasing thing and you're going through that and you're having those conversations and it's very draining, and you come back and you're feeling drained, but are you also at that point when you get home and you're by yourself, or you're with somebody that you trust, or somebody that
Mhm.
you're able to not wear the mask with, is there, like, what are you doing there? Is there, like, are you just like, man, that was so tough, I didn't like that party, or I didn't like, are you sharing feelings of, like, regret
Disconnect.
almost,
Yeah,
or
discomfort or disconnect or
yeah.
yeah, I think about my 20s and when I was working in kind of a traditional office setting, like before I started teaching, right? When I worked at
Mhm.
IBM, I was in New York. And I think about how utterly drained I was when I got home from work then. Um, I was working, you know, I think it was 8:30 to 5 or whatever, standard, 9 to 5 job. I was driving 45 minutes to an hour each way to get from, where I lived to where I worked. So my days were like, easily 11 hours from when I left the house to when I got home. And I was so tired all the time, like, I had no energy for anything at home. I would come home and scrape something together to eat, and I would crash out on my couch, and I would watch TV, and that would be my day, and then I'd go to bed, and I'd start it again the next day, and it wasn't until I there was no way. I didn't know, like, how to accommodate my ADHD then because, this is, like, way before there was even a suspicion for me that I was ADHD or that I had, neurodivergence. Um, but I left that job and started teaching, and it was only when I started teaching and I started having control over my environment in a way that I didn't have when I was working in an office that I started to flourish really where I did really well. Like people loved me in my office job. I was successful. When I left, my boss that gave one of my recommendations told the new dean that I was working for that it was really necessary that I move on because I was too good for the job that I was doing, which,
Mm.
you know, so that's how effective
Right.
that's how effective the mask was when I was in my 20s because all of that was me performing what I was supposed to be doing in that environment because I did
Mhm.
not there were a couple things that I did when I was there that were, that I got a charge out of that, were that, like I said, y- having nervous system that needs that like passion and engagement in order to get like the dopamine from. There were a lot of things that we did. We did some great events when I was in communications. We did some good stuff. But I was masking so effectively and, presenting so completely as neurotypical that, I left the job and they're like that, she needs to do more than this because that's how skilled you are. And so um that's why I was tired all the time though. And at that time I was living with someone who I now understand I didn't feel safe with ever in the entire relationship.
Right.
So I didn't have a place or a person to go home to unmask. Like I don't really think I had friends that I never masked with you. Like we've known each other since we were 17, right? And so
Mhm.
like I don't feel like we masked around each other. I was always kind of a genuine, at least a more genuine version of myself. But we also skipped like huge chunks of each other's lives because I moved away and like, it
Right.
wasn't
Totally.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we went back and forth with different times of being more close and not, and, like, I think you missed a huge like, all of that era pretty much when I was in New York in particular. So,
Right.
I
Mm.
don't think I think the pressures of certain circumstances and certain environments, especially, like, having an office job, was super draining because I was having to perform so much.
Mhm. You're saying so here's now I guess what I'm trying to figure out. Is it how is do you have like almost like a who am I
Mhm.
moment?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just talk about that a little because how do you go through that? Like how do you
It's
get
hard.
past that? How do you know who you are?
Oh god. That has been the big challenge. Like, I would say the biggest thing that has been, that has come out of the diagnosis and getting medicated is starting to look at, okay, so what are the things that are who I am versus what I have been performing at? And,
Mhm.
it's kind of a continuation of that stripping away process. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Well, so we're recording this and it's around the holidays, right?
Mhm.
And this year I have had some challenges that have made it so I haven't been able to do a lot of my traditional holiday stuff. So, like this year, I didn't make or participate in like a big Thanksgiving dinner. And I usually love the holidays. I love having people around. Again, that was indications of the extroversion that I have come to recognize. I'm more extroverted than I thought I was. And that I get more fulfillment out of that. The holidays were always kind of like a gathering time, but I'm realizing that some of the traditions and some of the things that I do, like making the big meal and this and that, are really draining experiences because they take a lot of executive functioning. You have to start planning for them days ahead of time. I did a good portion of my holiday shopping today, several days ahead of the holiday, so I wouldn't have to deal with last minute people right before and trying to but there's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning that has to go into um those meals. And
Mhm.
stepping away from it, I started to realize that it really isn't the meal that I want.
It's the
It's
the
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 people.
feeling, the feels.
It is. It's the feels, it's the community, it's the having people in my house, it's like making that experience, and how can I start making choices that support my nervous system better so I don't overextend myself and end up feeling drained by the end of the holiday season because I have done XYZ and I have put myself out and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. Like, there are things that are very important to me. I will make my mom's cookies on Christmas Eve because the smell of those cookies is it's part of the holiday for me, is
Mhm.
that experience. And so I will do those things that I know are the rejuvenating things, but I am severely cutting back on the performative aspects of the holidays. Like, I can't do it all. I decorated for Christmas this year, but I didn't decorate all out like I often do. Like, I got up the things that were important and I was sitting with like the bins of things I hadn't quite finished putting up, and it was already, halfway through the season, and I was like, "You know what? This is what we got."
Right.
Like, I don't need to kill myself to reach some standard that's going to drain me anymore. And that is also part of like getting away from, the people pleasing or the feeling like I need to do things, especially as a mom, having a small child who's like, "Oh, I've got to make this Christmas magical." You know what makes Christmas magical for her? The fact that we're all together enjoying ourselves.
Totally.
She put up we did
Yeah.
the decorations, she helped with the decorations and she petered out on the energy too. And so I was like, okay, this is what we got. Like, and it's,
Yeah.
it's fine. Like, it doesn't have to be.
We can stop here.
Yeah, we can stop here. And that like I think that's part of what masking did to me too, is because I didn't understand where I ended and where the mask began, that I always pushed too hard and too far to try to appear more and more neurotypical, right? I pushed really hard on that and I pushed myself really hard. And that leads to burnout, which we'll do another episode on later. But like that's one of the bad outcomes of masking for a long time is you get burned out because
Mhm.
you're running this extra program in the background to make sure you feel like you're performing and looking the way you're supposed to look instead of just being like, here I am.
So, getting back to the who am I thing, how how do you figure out like and one of the things that I'm thinking is part of it is just the energy, right?
Hmm.
Like, do I have energy when I do this? Do
Right.
I not have energy?
Hmm.
And that, also translates to the enjoyment and
Yes.
the positive signals that you're getting from your brain. Is that how you're figuring it out?
Yeah, that's definitely. I'm more attuned now to my nervous system being in a state of comfort. The world used to be a constantly irritating experience for me. And not
Okay.
just like, not sensory wise, just like,
Well, except
you
for
know,
allergies.
except for allergies. Inside joke. Yeah, there's so much that was just irritating when you're wearing. I mean, think about it. Think about what Halloween is like. You've worn a mask at Halloween before, right?
Mhm. Just as a gorilla one time. That was very uncomfortable.
Yes, it's very uncomfortable. And so it may not be the physical experience of it, but it's very uncomfortable to constantly be feeling like you need to put on a show instead of, or you need to, or even it might not even be that you're putting on a show. You want to hide. Like for me, the mask was hiding. The mask is protection. It's still a representation of who I am. Like, and one of the things that like the mask isn't me lying. Like it's not me being untruthful. It's me being scared, right? And it's something I'm
Mhm.
hiding behind. And
Right.
that's a different thing. But feeling like I need to do that in order to be comfortable, to be safe, etc., is like having that gorilla mask on all the time.
Right. It's very sweaty.
Sweaty, stinky,
Yeah,
itchy.
there's that. So taking off the mask,
Mhm.
becoming yourself, doing that. How do you start?
Oh boy. Little baby steps, I think. Like the babiest of baby steps. Like taking as small a steps as you can, finding the people who you start to recognize you feel safe with, people who know you're on your journey to unmask, that you can be transparent with and say, I am starting to recognize that XYZ are behaviors I do in order to protect myself and are masking behaviors. Can you help me recognize when I'm kind of heading into those? Um, One of the things that I learned is that if I am emotionally flooded and I feel unsafe, I shut down. I don't, they talk about fight or flight, but there's also what's called a fawn response or a freeze response. Fawning is where you just kind of like make things comfortable for everybody else, and
Mhm.
freezing is where you just stop. And I definitely oscillate between those two when I feel unsafe. So if I am in an emotional conversation and I start feeling flooded, the people who are closest to me know that if I start to get really quiet and I start to just agree with things, that something's wrong. And the people who are safe will then advocate for me, because at those times I can't advocate for myself. When I'm that flooded or I'm that upset, I can't advocate for myself anymore. I'm
Mhm.
incapable of it. I shut down. The mask comes completely on, and I am, behind a wall essentially.
Mhm. How is it telling people about this and getting them to understand it? Like, sort of the people that you're comfortable with,
Mhm.
and you wanna let them know to
It's
help you
Yeah,
to recognize
it's
it.
not always great.
I wouldn't think so.
It's it has not been great, in one instance in particular, I have pretty much, you know, lost a friendship over it because, um, the person that I brought it up to, I can't be around her because she's too much like I used to be, and I'm I have realized that a lot of my masking is unconscious. So it's not where I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna go into this situation and I'm going to put my mask on." Or even like you were talking at the top of the episode, you were like, "Oh, in work you have a certain persona and at home you have a different persona." And, like I can't it's not conscious. I don't say, "Okay, I'm going into this and I'm gonna be this way." It just snaps into place. And when I'm with people who are reflective of how I used to be, I can't always control it coming up. It just happens. And then afterward, I will realize how tired I am. I will get a headache. Sometimes I start getting a headache during the time I'm with them. I start getting flooded. I start having all of this, like, I'll be more likely to have physiological responses, like I will flush, I will feel like heated, I will like all of this. I'll have heart palpitations. Like these are the physiological responses that my nervous system now has to attempting to
Mhm.
mask. So when you tell
Um,
people your presence makes me
right,
feel like I'm wearing a gorilla mask and it's itchy and I'm sweating. They don't respond very well.
right. I wouldn't think so, but well, the other thing there is, I would think, I mean, both probably the reality and the fear is that once you tell somebody, well, I am not that person, or I do not behave that way, I do not
Mhm.
do those things, I do not enjoy the things that we've done in the past. You're telling them those things, and maybe that's the features that they liked about you.
Yeah.
Like those, that would be the fear, right?
Yep.
But then I guess the way of looking at that is, oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
now you're getting away from that.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the people who, benefited from my people pleasing are not people that have stayed in my life. I broke up with a 4-year long romantic relationship just about a year ago because I knew I was at this part of the journey where I started to unmask, and his response was like, "You're mad at me all the time, and I don't understand why you're mad at me, and you do, like this and that." And I'm like, "I'm not mad at you. I'm just not making things easy all the time." And when you are the person who has made things easy for someone for your entire relationship and more comfortable and been very accommodating, and you start to have things called boundaries, and they're hard and they're not smooth and easy to move around, he didn't like me anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
it's like,
A whole different
"Okay,
thing.
sorry."
Right. And then I would think this is one of those things where it's very hard to do initially and you struggle through it.
Mhm.
But I would assume that now, once you get on the other side of this and you're recognizing, you're now like, you're not putting the mask on when you're meeting people, you're not being that person. So it is a lot easier on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely easier now. It's almost like it's like any reflex, right? Like I'm learning to strengthen it, which is why like I had to put a pause in a couple of my friendships because like I'm hoping I get to the point where their masking won't be as triggering for me. Right? Like they can mask and I won't care. Like, but it won't create this automatic process where where I start to compensate and I start to be careful and I start to change how I am because they're in that state. And so I am hoping that it gets to that, maybe at some point, But the other thing is that, like there's all those adages. You can only meet someone as, from where they've healed to. Like if somebody hasn't healed as far as you have, you can't
Mhm.
really, they're never going to meet you where you're at. You're farther ahead on the road than they are, or you're on a different road because they have chosen, a different path or whatever it is. And letting go of those friendships and letting go of those relationships has essentially meant I'm rebuilding good portions of my life right now. Like I am,
Right.
I am rebuilding an entirely new social circle because I can't, and starting new relationships and new friendships based on who I am now, which is different. It's just
Mhm.
fundamentally different. So
And I mean, I think, you know, first of all, excited to be a part of the still the old crew that's there.
the
But I
original,
mean,
the
I
OG.
think the original crew there, the reason why you still have some of those people is because you were able to be around
Mhm.
them and not mask.
Yeah. No, the people who have persisted are people that I knew before my 20s. I didn't really start masking. I was able to not mask through most of college, I think. I started masking in the later part of college when things got more business-like, and I masked through a good portion of my 20s. When I look back at my friendships in my late 20s, I recognize now that they weren't really my friends because they weren't very nice to me.
Right.
I had this realization a couple of months ago. I'm like, that because that's the autism. That's where I think I'm autistic. I didn't read the social signals I as what they were. And now that I look back, I'm like, I said this to a friend of mine when I was going through and I was telling her a specific story, and she's like, they weren't your friends. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
know, and I didn't know I didn't know it then. Like I didn't know it because I didn't know how to read that they weren't my friends. I was just kind of like running on, oh, you know, this is how they treat everybody, but it wasn't. It was how they treated me.
Right. Right. Yeah, I used to think too, like, in going to parties, and I'm thinking like later parties, like 30s, even
Mhm.
40s, going to parties and just dreading them, certain parties,
Mhm.
because it's going to be the same small talk. It's going to be the
Right.
same,
I hate
like
small talk.
whatever, and just be so annoying and
Mhm.
just so like
Yep.
unenjoyable. And
Yep.
I imagine in taking those feelings and just putting them out there, like that's kind of, I guess, what you could be just every day,
Yep.
right? If you're doing the masking. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's that sensation of I'm uncomfortable here
right.
and I need to figure out a way to be comfortable. And so I would turn myself into whomever was hosting the party, whatever, I would mirror, I would behave like them. I would say I liked, like that was a big thing. Like I have been thinking about music a lot lately. And you and I have a story of, on our first date. Now
Ah,
everybody
you're,
gets to know that we dated.
yeah. Yep. Yep. She played classical music. I'm like,
I played
what?
I played classical music in the car,
What?
and
This does not work out.
he was just completely thrown off by the fact that I had classical music in the car. And
I was.
I did love classical music. Also, it's going to very much date us, although my car that I was driving at the time was older than I was. So it's very, very old car. My car in high school did not have an FM radio. And so I had like easy listening and classical music, or like the two like genres.
Right.
And so in
It
order to impress Russ,
went classical,
I went
which
on the classical station. And it forever kind of marked him as, okay, this is Regina. And but that was
what?
performance. Like that was like, I mean, it, I didn't have a lot of choice, and that there wasn't a tape deck. There wasn't a tape deck. There wasn't a CD player. There weren't other options in that. Yeah.
You're going to need to put definitions for all of these things for the younger listeners of the show.
What is a tape deck?
They're still looking up AM radio. Like, what is that?
Does anybody even listen to the radio anymore? But yeah, like so that had that was there was some masking involved in that. There was okay, I was taking a choice of like, do I put on, I don't even remember what would they call it, yacht rock now, I think they refer to some of that like music that was played on like the AM easy listening station. But I would often just agree with other people especially about music, and I'm not sure what it is about music that made me more insecure, but I would just agree with whatever somebody didn't like something and say, oh yeah, I don't like that too, that kind of thing. That was very heavily part of my masking. And so then when I started to try to figure out who I was underneath it and who I really was, it turns out that I really do love classical music.
Okay. Well, as the editor, I'll try to get some classical in there as well.
Right.
Public domain, so it should be fine.
And I love dorky things, and I have problems with romantic comedies, but I love romantic comedies, and I love pop music. I think pop music is like my favorite genre, but like I would always be embarrassed to say that because it was like, oh, it's so mundane, or oh, you like pop, you don't like rock and roll or whatever. It's like, no, I keep up with current music because like I love me some 80s, but like it gets a little old after a while. Like it's, I like Chapel Roan, I like Sabrina Carpenter, I like some I like new music, and I like new pop music, and that doesn't make it any less valuable. Still like Coldplay,
right?
Imagine Dragons.
Right.
I'm trying to think of all the bands that are like
ones
that people have cringed when I was like, oh, I love their, and they're like, oh, you like that? And it's like, I do, because I can say that now.
I'm trying to think of the one band that everybody makes fun of. I can't think of it right now, but okay. There's
a Train.
Maybe, I don't know. I'd make fun of that.
Yeah.
So I would say what made I mentioned to you, I kind of came into this conversation, I wasn't in the best of moods when I came into the conversation.
That's right. You did say that.
But like being real, being open, and having conversations like this makes you feel better.
It does.
It's really interesting.
That's really what we're doing this show for. Is
being ourselves.
Yeah, to be ourselves and to help people understand that they can be themselves. And unmasking's hard, but I can tell you, coming from the other side, that dropping it and is really very fulfilling. I know the life I'm building now is very different from the life I built before. But I also know that I'm being my authentic self. So these relationships and these friendships, and the ones that I'm lucky enough to have persist, like yours, are going to be fabulous forever.
Exactly. Well, thanks for sharing all this with me.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. What's your experience like masking? Have you started trying to drop your mask? Wherever you are in your journey, we would love to hear from you. Catch us on Instagram at Divergent Paths Consulting, no spaces. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, like and leave a review, and share with your spicy-brained friends, or perhaps someone that loves someone with a spicy brain. And until next time, stay spicy.